The Carolingian Empire, lasting from 800 to 887, was a realm that reshaped the destiny of Western and Central Europe. It emerged in the shadows of a fractured post-Roman world, where power lay scattered and uncertain. At its height, it was ruled by the formidable Carolingian dynasty, first as kings of the Franks from 751, then as kings of the Lombards in 774, and finally, with an act of breathtaking symbolism, as emperors of the West. That moment came in the year 800, when Pope Leo III placed a crown upon the head of Charlemagne. With a single ceremony, the Frankish king became Roman emperor, a title not claimed in the West for centuries. In doing so, the Pope ignored the distant Byzantine Empire, whose rulers still considered themselves the heirs of Rome. The Carolingian Empire thus stood at a crossroads of history, sometimes remembered as the first phase of the Holy Roman Empire, sometimes as the rebirth of Rome itself in a new and mysterious form. Rise of the Carolingians, 732 to 768. The road to Charlemagne's empire began decades earlier with a man who never called himself king, yet wielded more power than many monarchs, Charles Martel. Known to history as the Hammer, Martel commanded the Frankish realms north of the Pyrenees and left behind a legacy shrouded in legend. In 732, his destiny collided with that of an invading Muslim army at the Battle of Tours. The Saracen forces had forged a fearsome cavalry, blending the swiftness of Berber light horsemen with the crushing strength of Arab heavy cavalry. By contrast, the Christian warriors of Europe lacked the vital innovation of the stirrup, a tool that gave riders greater power in combat. Yet against all odds, Charles Martel's forces triumphed. The mysterious hammer of history struck, and with it, Martel secured not just a battle, but the very survival of Christian Europe. The chroniclers of the time and later historians alike recognized the magnitude of his victory. Edward Gibbon himself would call Charles Martel the paramount prince of his age. And yet, Martel chose not to seize the royal crown, leaving that step to his son. Pepin III, known as Pepin the Short, would bridge the world of warrior and king. In 741, with the blessing of Pope Zachary, Pepin transformed the Carolingian house from mere power brokers into an anointed dynasty. The partnership between the Frankish rulers and the papacy would shape centuries of European history. And then came Charlemagne. When Pepin died in 768, his son inherited half the kingdom, while the other half fell to his brother Carloman. But fate intervened. Carloman died young, leaving Charlemagne as sole ruler. From that moment on, the world would come to know him not merely as king of the Franks, but as the architect of a new empire. By the year 800, the Pope's crown rested on his head, and Charlemagne stood as emperor, a ruler who cast his shadow across a continent. The Carolingian Empire, born of conquest and crowned in mystery, had begun its reign. Charlemagne and the Carolingian Empire, reign of Charlemagne, 768 to 814. When Charlemagne ascended to the throne in 768, the world was not yet prepared for the empire he would carve out of Europe's fractured kingdoms. In his lifetime, he forged a realm that mirrored the reach of ancient Rome itself. The Roman legions had once faltered in the dark forests of Germany, defeated at Teutoburg in the year 9 AD. But Charlemagne succeeded where they failed. He subdued the Germanic resistance, pushing his influence to the Elbe and even shaping events that rippled as far as the Russian steppes. His reign was marked not by peace but by the drumbeat of war. Nearly every year Charlemagne rode to battle, leading campaigns with his own hand. In 774 he crushed the Lombard kingdom, claiming the crown of Lombardy for himself, a Frankish king reborn as a ruler of Italy. Yet not all of his ventures ended in triumph. In 778, a campaign into Spain ended in disaster at the Battle of Roncesvalles Pass. There, his rear guard was ambushed in the shadowed valleys of the Pyrenees, a haunting defeat that legend would later immortalize in the Song of Roland. Still, Charlemagne pressed onward. In 794 he brought Bavaria to heel, forcing Duke Tassilo III to renounce his power. The Avar Confederation fell soon after, shattered by campaigns led by Bavarian forces at Charlemagne's command. By 803 their strongholds were reduced to ruins. But perhaps his most relentless struggle was with the Saxons. From 772 to 804 Charlemagne waged brutal wars against them, decades of conquest, rebellion, and bloodshed. Among the darkest episodes was the massacre of Verdun in 782, where thousands of Saxons were executed after refusing to submit to his rule. And yet, by 802 he sought to impose order with the Lex Saxonum, a codified law binding the once defiant Saxons into the fabric of his empire. By the twilight of his reign, the Carolingian Empire stretched across nearly all of Western Europe. but its future was uncertain. Charlemagne began dividing his domains among his heirs. Charles the Younger was granted Neustria, Pepin received Italy, and Louis the Pious was given Aquitaine. Yet fate claimed them one by one. Pepin died in 810, leaving only an illegitimate son, Bernard. Charles followed in 811, leaving no heirs. At last in 813 Charlemagne raised his remaining son Louis to the dignity of co-emperor. And when Charlemagne died in the winter of 814, the weight of the empire, its power, its promise and its burdens, fell squarely upon Louis the Pious. The reign of Charlemagne had ended. But the legacy of the Carolingian Empire was only beginning to cast its mysterious shadow across the Middle Ages. Reign of Louis the Pious and the Civil War, 814 to 843. Louis the Pious' rise to emperor was unexpected. As the third son of Charlemagne, he had originally been crowned king of Aquitaine at just 3 years old. With the deaths of his elder brothers, he went from a boy who became a king to a man who would be emperor. Although his reign is remembered primarily for dynastic struggles and civil war, Louis, true to his epithet, was deeply devoted to religion. Upon taking power, he sought to rule the people by law and with the wealth of his piety. He restored churches, encouraged learning and sponsored monasteries, reviving many that had disappeared and founding new ones across the empire. Yet Louis's reign lacked security. Immediately after Charlemagne's death, he rushed to Aachen and exiled many of his father's trusted advisors, including Wala of Corbie, who posed a dynastic threat as a descendant of Charles Martel. Monastic exile became one of Louis's chief methods for neutralizing rivals. In 817, his nephew Bernard of Italy rebelled against being made subordinate to Louis's eldest son, Lothar. The revolt was crushed, but Bernard's punishment, blinding, proved fatal, killing him within days. Though Italy was restored to imperial control, Louis's act of public penance in 822 for Bernard's death damaged his prestige among the nobility and made him appear vulnerable to clerical influence. Louis's succession plans only deepened divisions. In 817 he had created 3 sub-kingdoms for his sons. Lothar received Italy and the title of co-emperor, Pepin received Aquitaine, and Louis the German was given Bavaria. But when Louis attempted in 823 to provide for Charles the Bald, his son by his second wife, opposition mounted. His eldest sons resisted bitterly, while the rise of Bernard of Septimania, a powerful court figure who displaced Lothar as co-ruler in 829, further inflamed tensions. By 830, Pepin, resentful of his father's interference in Aquitaine, gained the support of disgruntled nobles, sparking civil war. Louis was briefly overthrown by his sons in 833, imprisoned, and stripped of his imperial authority in a coup supported by Pope Gregory IV. Though restored in 835 at Metz, Louis's authority never fully recovered. When Pepin of Aquitaine died in 838, Louis designated Charles the Bald as his heir, but Aquitanian nobles chose Pepin's son, Pepin II, creating another unresolved succession dispute. Upon Louis's death in 840, Lothar ignored earlier petitions and claimed the entire empire. His brothers, Charles the Bald and Louis the German, resisted. The resulting struggle culminated in the Odes of Strasbourg 842, where Charles and Louis declared Lothar unfit to rule. These odes, sworn in both Romance and Old High German, symbolized the growing cultural and linguistic divide between East and West, often seen as the birth of France and Germany. Finally, the Treaty of Verdun 843 ended the civil war by dividing the Carolingian Empire among Louis's 3 surviving sons. This settlement marked a decisive moment in European history, laying the foundations for the kingdoms of Western and Central Europe. After the Treaty of Verdun, 843 to 877. The Treaty of Verdun in 843 marked the formal division of the Carolingian Empire into 3 distinct realms. Lothar I retained the imperial title, along with Italy and the lands between the Rhine and Rhone rivers, known collectively as the Central Frankish Realm. Louis the German was granted the Eastern Frankish Realm, encompassing territories east of the Rhine and north and east of Italy, laying the foundation for modern Germany. Charles the Bald received the Western Frankish Realm, covering all lands west of the Rhone, the precursor to modern France. In 844, Lothar transferred Italy to his eldest son, Louis II, and made him co-emperor in 850. By the Treaty of Prum, 855, Lothar divided his remaining realm among his 3 sons. Louis II retained Italy, Charles received Burgundy, and Lothar II inherited the lands stretching from the Low Countries to the Jura Mountains. This realm, lacking a historic name, became known as Lotharingia. Louis II, dissatisfied with this arrangement, allied with his uncle Louis the German against both Lothar II and Charles the Bald in 858. Charles the Bald, deeply unpopular with his nobles, was unable to muster an army and fled to Burgundy. His throne was only saved when the bishops refused to crown Louis the German in his place. Charles recovered but faced continued conflict. In 860 he invaded the kingdom of Charles of Burgundy but was repelled. Family rivalries continued to destabilize the empire. In 862, Lothar II ceded lands to Louis II in exchange for support in securing a divorce from his wife, Tutberga, a dispute that drew in his uncles and the papacy for years. When Charles of Burgundy died in 863, his lands were absorbed into Louis II's kingdom. Lothar II himself died in 869 without legitimate heirs, since the Pope had refused to recognize his attempts to remarry. His territory was divided between Charles the Bald and Louis the German by the Treaty of Meissen in 870. Meanwhile, Louis the German struggled with disputes among his three sons. When Emperor Louis II of Italy died childless in 875, he named his cousin Carloman of Bavaria, the eldest son of Louis the German, as heir. However, Pope John VIII instead supported Charles the Bald, who was crowned King of Italy and Emperor. The following year, Louis the German died, and Charles the Bald attempted to seize East Francia as well. His ambitions ended in defeat at Andernach, after which East Francia was divided among Louis the Younger, Carloman of Bavaria, and Charles the Fat. Decline, 877 to 888. After the death of Charles the Bald in 877, the Carolingian Empire entered a period of decline marked by external invasions and internal fragmentation. Viking raiders pressed hard in the north and west, while unrest simmered from Italy to Aquitaine and from the Hungarian frontier to the Baltic. Charles died while crossing the pass of Mont Cenis, leaving the western Frankish crown to his son Louis the Stammerer, though the imperial title lapsed. Louis the Stammerer, frail in both health and authority, died only 2 years later in 879. His lands were divided between his two elder sons, Louis III, who took Neustria and Francia, and Carloman II, who inherited Aquitaine and Burgundy. Meanwhile, in Italy, Carloman of Bavaria briefly secured the kingship, but a debilitating stroke forced him to cede Italy to his brother Charles the Fat and Bavaria to another brother, Louis the Younger of Saxony. That same year, Boso of Vienne declared himself king in Provence, establishing the kingdom of Lower Burgundy. In 881, Charles the Fat was crowned emperor. The following year brought dramatic change. Both Louis the Younger of Saxony and Louis III of Francia died, consolidating Saxony and Bavaria under Charles, while Francia and Neustria passed to Carloman II of Aquitaine, who also absorbed Lower Burgundy. Yet Carloman II's reign was short and troubled. In 884 he died in a hunting accident. His lands passed to Charles the Fat, who briefly reunited nearly all the territories once held by Charlemagne. Despite this apparent restoration, Charles the Fat proved unequal to the task of defending the empire. Afflicted by what is thought to have been epilepsy, he struggled with leadership and military command. His decision in 886 to buy off Viking raiders during the siege of Paris rather than confront them militarily deeply damaged his reputation, casting him as weak and cowardly in the eyes of his nobles. In 887, his nephew Arnulf of Carinthia, the illegitimate son of Carloman of Bavaria, rose in rebellion. Rather than resist, Charles retreated to Niedingen where he died in 888. With his death, the Carolingian Empire once again fragmented, leaving behind a divided realm and a contested succession. Divisions of the empire. After the death of Charles the Fat in 888, the once mighty Carolingian Empire fragmented permanently. The great unity forged by Charlemagne gave way to regional kingdoms and principalities, each led by powerful nobles or opportunistic rulers. Arnulf of Carinthia secured control over Carinthia, Bavaria, Lorraine, and the core lands of modern Germany. In the west, Count Odo of Paris, celebrated for his defense against the Vikings at the Siege of Paris, was elected king of western Francia, the foundation of what would later become France. Meanwhile, Ranulf II declared himself king of Aquitaine. In Italy, power fell to Count Berenger of Friuli, who claimed the kingship of the peninsula. To the south, Upper Burgundy was carved out under Rudolf I, while Lower Burgundy passed to Louis the Blind, son of Boso of Alls and grandson, through his mother, of Emperor Louis II. The remaining part of Lotharingia was absorbed into the Duchy of Burgundy, further splintering the Carolingian legacy. The once united empire of Charlemagne had dissolved into a patchwork of kingdoms, each competing for dominance. This period of division not only marked the end of Carolingian hegemony but also set the stage for the rise of new European powers in the centuries to come. If you enjoyed this journey through history, don't miss out on more deep dives into the past. History Love is your go-to YouTube channel for exploring the fascinating stories of the past. Subscribe today and join our community of history enthusiasts.